Previously talked about everything I read in 2025, which was over 90 books. And if I had to narrow it down, I would pick these 10 as my absolute favorites of the year. And I threw everything into a tier list just for the fun of it because that's what I constantly see on social media. So I am replicating that here, but only talking about the top 10. So, hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Zach. This is a mostly science fiction and fantasy book review channel. And as you will see in these top 10 books that I personally enjoyed the most, they're mostly fantasy books or sci fantasy. So this is top 10 fantasy reads that I read in 2025. And to start things off, this is in no particular order of ranking them. Just these are the S tier, the best of the best out of 90 plus books that were a mix of a bunch of genres, admittedly. So it's not all fantasy that I read in one year. I do diversify. But to start things off, maybe the first one that comes to mind, the books that stuck with me the most was a debut from 2025, and that is not debut, but a first in the series is The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. So definitely not a debut. Abercrombie is a master of the craft, Lord Grimdark. Everyone knows the name from the First Law trilogy, and this is a book that I just really enjoyed, and it actually got me back into Grimdark because I read just the First Law book, and it was just okay. The blade itself was all right. I didn't totally get it reading that, and I never got to book two, but I read The Devils and absolutely fell in love with Abercrombie's writing. I thought it was such a more fun book for me personally. It was just a lighthearted, a little bit more comical. It showed Abercrombie as a more mature writer, and I just connected with the characters. I thought it was just a great story. I love the world building and how he takes the ideas similar that we've seen before, tropes of subverting them, that the elves are the bad people in this story, that this is a kind of a war-torn, dirty world, reminded of that, of the dirt and the poop and everything else that in the world that the characters deal with on their journey, of a sort of classic hero journey, but with the Abercrombie twist of a bit of a subversion of themes where, yes, it's the monsters that have to be the good guys. So it's sort of like a Suicide Squad to at least compare it with a modern media franchise, but done in a totally great way where they're all monsters. You have vampires, mortals, magicians, mages, sorcerers. Yeah, it's just so much fun. I loved it. I thought it was a great time. And yes, it got me back into reading the rest of the First Law trilogy, which do show up on my list. And I would put Last Argument of Kings, Best Served Cold. They're definitely in the A tier for me on my tier list, but The Devils was the standout, and I think it was the S tier best fantasy from Abercrombie that I read this year. And to move over to the next book, it is another first in a series that, yes, everyone has heard about, but I finally read in 2025, and that is Malazan Book of the Fallen. And I finally read Gardens of the Moon. And I would put Gardens of the Moon as my S tier best of the year of the top 10 for sure. It is a book that described as hard to get into, but I honestly didn't find that. I was immediately drawn into Gardens of the Moon, the world. It was just great that, yes, you're dropped into the middle of a story, which is like any great story lately. It's like a Star Wars where you're dropped in media res right into the action. And yeah, Gardens of the Moon just kicks off and does not hold your hand, but it does explain everything as you go along. So I don't really understand that the difficulty of reading that. Yes, there's a lot of names and words that you probably don't understand at first, but you do pick it up along the way. Just like Lord of the Rings, you didn't understand all the words in the very first chapter, but it's explained throughout the book and it just builds on the world. And again, the world building was great. I love the story. There's a lot of characters to keep track of, but you just go with the flow, understand what's happening. And yeah, I just love the characters. I loved the bridge burners. The Whiskey Jack's crew was just amazing. I loved Animator Rake. There's so many killer characters to just, yeah, that to talk about, that I still think about the first book so much. I did read the second book, Deadhouse Gates, and I put it lower. I did not like that as much because we don't follow the bridge burners in the second book, but I still read it, and I'm currently on Memories of Ice, so I'm not sure if I'll finish that by the end of the year. I'm over halfway done, but I didn't put it on this list because I'm technically not finished yet as of this recording in the last week of December. But without a doubt, Gardens of the Moon, I think, was a great read and one of my favorite reads of the year looking back. And another first in the series to keep this train going of new series that I got into in 2025 was Gunmetal Gods by Zamil Akhtar. This is another less talked about book, but yes, I heard about it on Reddit, so it does appear once in a while in the fantasy subreddit, like Malzahn and these other big hitters of the genre, and I think for good reason. Also, of course, because I'm talking about it as a top 10, really enjoyed Gunmetal Gods. I thought the world building that Akhtar builds is superb. It is a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy epic with mainly two POVs. So if you're looking for a break from Malzahn, it's a great break because it's only two POVs and it switches between the two characters every chapter as we kind of see two sides of a war fighting. And in this Middle Eastern world of Ottoman Empire and Crusades, sort of English Empire of the West versus East battling. We're in this world of the Middle East, and you can smell the spices, you can taste the hookah, you can recite the poems with Keva. It's just a really rich world. There's magic here. You start learning about the magic system, which is pretty cool towards the end. And it's all wrapped around this story, as the back of the book says, of Eldritch horrors. So you have these Lovecraftian gods that are part of the world that we do see here and there in the story, and they play a very interesting part of the world. And I thought it was a great setup to the series, and I really did have a lot of fun. The counterpoint to that is I recently read the second book of the series, Conqueror's Blood, and did not enjoy it as much. Take that maybe in mind with a grain of salt, but I thought the first book was absolutely worth reading, and I would still give it a favorite read because I still think about it, and maybe because I read the second book and was a bit disappointed that maybe puts the first book even better because it was so great. I love the first book. But Conqueror's Blood, it takes a different story and you follow two new characters. That's why I'm talking about this after Malzahn. Similar to Malzahn, you follow two new characters in the second book of Gunmetal Gods, and it's a slightly different magic system in the second book, even though, like in Malzahn, you do follow a bit of the same characters from the first book, so it does have a connecting thread. It's in the same world, but the first book of Malzahn was great. The first book of Gunmetal Gods is great, and both of their second books were a bit of a letdown for me personally, even though this is just one person's opinion, and a lot of people do rank Deadhouse Gates, for example, very highly on their list, and they think it's better than the first book, but I found the opposite. I like the more action-oriented of, for example, Guards of the Moon, whereas Deadhouse Gates is a little more political, military, kind of, not to say thriller, but military saga. And Gunmetal Gods, similarly, the first book was a bit more action, a bit dark. It was more, I would say, grimdark. And the second one, while still a bit dark, but it follows two female characters, and it's more of a bit of political intrigue and sort of castle politics, whereas the first one was more swords and magic fighting. So it's a different take on the same world. With that said, moving along to the fourth book that I wanted to talk about in my top 10 of the year, and that is The Failures by Benjamin Lyre. Another book in this maybe trilogy of really great world building. So I think Malzahn has great world building. Gunmetal Gods had great world building. And yes, The Failures, the first book of the Wanderlands, had really great world building. This is a book that I wish people read more of. It did appear on Reddit Fantasy, which is how I heard about it. So as always, thanks to Reddit for influencing my reading choices. But The Failures was a really great story. It's a bit of a sci fantasy because there is a bit of a science fiction technological edge to it, but there's still a lot of magic going on. It's just a really super creative world. I don't want to spoil too much, but if you like, I got the vibes of like an isekai anime or the manga Blame. Some people say pronounce it, but I've heard it pronounced Blom. But like it takes place in this world inside of a mountain. It has a lot of history, so you get a lot of lore drops, similar to like a Malzahn, where you're in this rich world that had been built and been thought about, Malzahn or Lord of the Rings. That you're living in a world that's totally fleshed out. You have a multiple POVs, so you do follow a couple different plot points. You have like the villain plot point, which is a really cool. You follow the Cabal, and they're sort of the villains. I guess you don't really know, but they're definitely scheming something in this first book. You also follow a kind of band of heroes that are on their quest. You follow a coming of age story. You follow, the isekai characters that are like the fish out of water portal fantasy that get transported to this world. and there's just a lot going on. So there's a lot to keep track of, but I was just in it and just enjoying the ride. And it's one of those books where, yes, all the plot threads do sort of converge at the end to a very satisfying conclusion, I thought, without being too spoilery. But I think The Failures by Benjamin Lyre is definitely worth a read or listen. I listened to the audiobook and I thought it was great. I really enjoyed the world building, full on world building vibes of Failures, Gunmetal Gods, and Malazan for sure. And then next up, the number 5 to talk about, not in ranked order, but number 5 to talk about that I guess you could say, yes, it is also a very great world building and the first of a series, and that is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So this is a book that I listened to for the first time this year. Don't need to talk much about this, but I did listen to the full cast audio version from Audible, and I thought the full cast version was great. I've already purchased and can't wait to read the book 2 of Harry Potter, but if you've never read Harry Potter like me, and you've only seen the movies like me, I do think the book was great, and I fully recommend the full cast audio version. Next up, so now I'll talk about not in a series for a second and take a break, and that is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, another book that is a bit older. It's been out for a few years. Finally read it as a buddy read this year, and I guess you could say world building, or just vibes. It had the best maybe vibes I read this year, the atmospheric kind of read. It's a very different kind of read from traditional epic fantasy that I was talking about in Failures or Gunmetal Gods or Malzahn or Devils. There's not like warring factions and princesses and empires and gods. It's just two characters, really, maybe mainly one character for the whole story in this world, and it's just a very unique, rich experience. I feel everyone's at least heard of it if you're in kind of the booktube space by now. And if you haven't read it, 2025 was the year that I finally read it. And I think it's definitely, yes, something that every reader should read if you like fantasy in general and just really good prose and writing. It's just a really interesting story. The ending, it doesn't really stick towards maybe like the 2/3, but the final epilogue is very emotional. So it does kind of stick that emotional ending, even if kind of the mystery didn't resolve exactly the way I was thinking. Not that it's a bad thing, but it does have a book that gives you all the feels at the end. So do check out Piranesi. And next up, another book that I could not stop thinking about, that for good reason, and I think this is the start of a series, and that is China Miéville's Perdido Street Station. So I'm reading this from the screen. Yes, Perdido Street Station is a book that still sticks with me today. I read it how long ago? Months ago as of this recording, and it's a book with really interesting world building in this more science fantasy genre, because main character is a scientist, but it's definitely fantastical. The city, the Perdido Street Station, it's just a very like weird, futuristic city. Characters are like half bugs. Some are just regular humans, some are other things. It's just a very imaginative world. But that said, with these like fantastical creatures in this city that feels like a character, everyone felt very real. You get attached to all the characters. The Garuda, these flying birdmen creatures, become a central part of the story. It's just, it's a book that has a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions at the end. Miéville does wrap it up very nicely. I think the ending, definitely sticks the ending from an emotional gut punch. It has some horror elements almost. It's got some scenes that really I still think about with some of the scenes. It's, a lot of really great writing going on in Perdido Street Station. And I do want to read, kind of on the list of 2026, more Miéville, because this was just a really great story, and I definitely want to check out more in this series and his other books. Next up, another first book of the series, so a lot of new series in my top 10 this year, and that is The Shadow of the Torture by Gene Wolfe, the first book of the Book of the New Sun. And this is a book, yes, that is talked about, and I heard about all the time on Reddit, because it's one of those books for deep fantasy readers. And having read the entire 4-book series this year, I put the other books a bit lower. I didn't like them as much as the first book. I think the first book really, it just immerses you in this world, and I think you could argue, and I think from what I read, that it was supposed to be just one long book, but it was broken up into these 4 volumes just because when it was published, I don't think they had big, chonker doorstopper books as they do now. But it is one consistent story through all 4 books. And reading the last book does make it seem that, yes, this is all planned as one big story that just wraps up all together. But the first book was a great introduction to the series. It introduces you to Severian. Severian's a very interesting character. And the world is just, talk about world building and masterful world building. Gene Wolfe's world for Earth in Book of the New Sun is just this far future dying Earth, and it's really interesting. It took me a lot of double reading, double listening, and checking the wiki and other analysis of this to understand what was happening. The language and the prose is just very rich, so it is a book that you do need to take your time with. I slowed down my audiobook speed while listening to this because there's just so much to grasp, but the first book really pulls you into the weird world, and yeah, a lot of fun. Next up, the final 2 books, which is a tough to make on this top 10 because I read the first book in the series for each of these, but I ranked them as A rank, whereas I thought the second book did improve on the formula. So that's where I would choose to be my best of the year. If I had to kind of put one against each other, book 1 or book 2, I would say book 2. And to start off, book 2 of The Sun Eater was my favorite of the year from Sun Eater. I only read 2, but while I enjoyed Empire of Silence, I thought it was a very interesting book. I don't see the criticism. I was immediately pulled into the world. Yes, it starts a little bit slow, but I've still enjoyed the journey. I thought it was great. But that said, book 2, Howling Dark, I thought improved on the formula and was a just great book. So it is definitely everything I am looking for in a science fantasy book. This is one that's the most, I guess, science fiction-y of the series because, yes, it takes place in space and they go from planet to planet, but it is more of a grounded, character-driven series that, yes, even though there are spaceships, it is a more fantasy on the end, so it's more science fantasy than pure science fiction dealing with just science fiction tropes. It has a lot of world building, which is what's great. I love this series the most, I think, because of that world building where it's got a long history of the world. There's different factions in kind of conflict with each other, even though we follow just mainly the main character. Hadrian Marlowe is our main POV we follow, but we do see through the other actions and characters in his orbit what is going on in this universe, and it's just great. I loved it. If you like Dune, I think you will absolutely love the Sun Eater saga, and I think Howling Dark was a improvement on book 1. It's definitely Ruocchio growing as a writer and a much better book than book 1, even though book 1 still makes the list as an A rank book this year. And lastly, and not in any order, but and the number 10 book to talk about, the 10th book, not the number 10, the 10th book to talk about is book 2 of Shadow of Leviathan, which is A Drop of Corruption. So again, another book where I had a bit trouble separating the two because the Tainted Cup was pretty good. So the debut book by Robert Jackson, not debut book, but the first book in the series of Robert Jackson Bennett's The Shadow of Leviathan series introduced us to a great world with Anna and Din, these 2 characters that it's like a Sherlock and Watson mystery. They're trying to solve a murder in the first book, and they kind of do that same formula here in the second book. So it is a bit of a rehash. And with that said, I think, again, an improvement, which is why I would rank this one in S tier. And the first book is an A tier, which is still great. It's a Hugo Award winning book. But the second book improves on the formula. We are deeper into the world building. Bennett doesn't need to spend as much time introducing the characters and their quirks, and we just get more Anna, more Din, more Leviathan, like world building drama about what is happening in this world with the Leviathans, with the characters, how the power works, how the different Empire stuff works. So you do, of course, need the context of the first book, which is great, still Hugo Award winning, but the second book just ramps it up one more notch. And I think if you enjoyed the first book, Tainted Cup, you're going to absolutely love A Drop of Corruption. It was great. I love the second book of Shadow of Leviathan. So that said, that is my full, I'll maybe stand over here a bit to the side. That was my full tier list and how I ranked every book that I read this year. So maybe I'll put this put some space here for the video. These are everything I read. So I read over 90 books this year. There were a lot of winners for sure. A lot of books that I still enjoyed in other tiers than just the S-ranked top 10 books. If I had to choose 10, these are my 10 that I would choose. The Devils, Gardens of the Moon, Gunmetal Gods, The Failures, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Piranesi, Perdido Street Station, The Shadow of the Torture, Howling Dark, and A Drop of Corruption. Those are the 10 that I would choose, but the rest of the books in my 90 that I read, some still great books in the A tier, like books 2 and 3 of The First Law. The Shadow of the Gods, the first book of the Bloodthorn saga, was a good start to the series. I read a bunch of Expanse books, so the rest of the Expanse that I read this year were all pretty good. I enjoyed all the Expanse. The rest of the Book of the New Sun was also still pretty good. So there's a lot of positives that I read this year and a lot of good books to talk about. But if the absolute standouts, yes, these are my top 10. And I hope you do check these out. If any of these top 10 you haven't read yet, I highly recommend to go read some of these top 10. They were great. In particular, if I had to choose maybe just one, the start to the series, it's tough. Malazan, without a doubt, if you love epic fantasy, or The Failures, if you like more of a technological science fantasy, was a really great book. And The Devils, if you like humor of it. Okay, I can't just choose just one. They're all good. All 10 are pretty good. The Devils, Gardens of the Moon, Gunmetal Gods, The Failures, Harry Potter. Yeah, they're all great. Check out these top 10. And if you have your recommendations, but I didn't read this year, what are your top 10s, or what did I miss? Should any of these lower books be maybe higher on my tier list? Were they your top 10? Like maybe The Shadow of the Gods or The Light of All That Falls? Was the Licanius trilogy one of your top 10s? I didn't read the next book, but I read Eilington's Licanius trilogy this year, and it was an A tier for sure. Shadow of What Was Lost, but I didn't like book 2 and 3 as much. So anyways, thanks for watching this video. I'm wrapping up here my top 10. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you have 10 new books to check out, or if you've read any of these, a few more to add to your TBR. My name is Zach. This is mostly science fiction fantasy. Check out more videos, and thanks for watching. See ya.